Hi, this is Mike from Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and on today's video we'll be taking a look at Tecware's VXR. Keep watching to find out more. Okay, so in today's video we'll be taking a look at Tecware's VXR dual chamber case, which you can see here. Now this is a dual tempered glass setup, as you can see, and some of you have probably already guessed it does take quite a few design elements from Lian Li's 011 XL and the other variants of that case. And obviously imitation is one of the best forms of flattery. So with this one, Tecware have tweaked a few things. It's not an exact replica of the Lian Li case for obvious reasons, but it certainly does take a lot of design elements from that particular case. Now some of the things that you may need to take into consideration when you're looking at a case like this, obviously it is quite a big case, but there are some limitations. So if you're going down the air cooling route, then you can use an air cooler up to a maximum of 140 millimeters. So that is going to rule out pretty much most of the 120mm fan-based coolers, especially the tower types. Normal fans, such as the stock cooler from AMD, such as the Wraith RGB, etc., will be absolutely fine. But obviously do take that into consideration. If you're planning an air-cooled build in this, then yeah, tower coolers are going to be something you're going to have to pay close attention to. Something you're not going to pay close attention to is graphics cards. Graphics card wise, you can fit a graphics card in here of up to 390 millimeters in length. Now there is a slight caveat to that. You have, obviously, because we've got that width restriction on this other side, you can't have really fat wide cards. So we'll be taking a look at that. We're hopefully going to be installing in here the XFX 5700 XT, which is essentially somewhat of a fat boy card, so that's what we'll be trying to put in here. But if you're slightly concerned or you don't want to have your graphics card in the traditional mounting method, there is actually an optional vertical mounting GPU kit which you can get for this case, so then obviously that opens up a lot more options for installation. Because we do have a dual chamber design, so we've got a front section and a rear section, when it comes to power supplies, you've got no issues whatsoever, up to 230 millimeters in length, and you can use a full-size ATX power supply, unlike the Lian Li 0111 Mini. So what we're going to do in this particular review is we're going to go through the case. I'll show you the insides, the outs, go through all the filters, all the options, etc. Then I'm going to go ahead and put my build into it, do some testing, and then come back with some of my final thoughts, and also some tips for those of you that may be considering building in this case. So let's get into it. So let's start with the obvious things and then we can take them out of the way to prevent reflections. So first of all, obviously we've got this tempered glass front section and also we've got a tempered glass side section. So from the front view there, you can see what that's like. There is a blanked out section here. Now actually I should mention as well, this case is also available in white. So if the black theme isn't your thing, then there is a white option for this as well, which all of this we'll put in the video description so you can check out the links there, and also the local pricing. And actually while we're talking of pricing, this is actually a really, really good option. Because of the amount of flexibility you've got here, you don't have that same massive high price. This you can pick up in the UK for anywhere around the £75 to £85 mark, which I actually think is fantastic value for money. Especially due to the fact you can, if you want to, put up to 9 120mm fans in here, which for cooling purposes should tick most boxes. So the front tempered glass section, we'll quickly take that off now. This is held on by thumb screws, and I've left the protective sheet on the front there as well. Also, a nice thing which I noticed in the packaging itself is actually really good, nice thick styrofoam, and also all of the corners of the glass have got these little plastic tags on them to protect it in transit, and also when you're during the build process. So you can just unscrew the front, take off the 4 thumb screws. There is actually rubber dampeners as well, which hold the glass in place, and then you can just lift it off. And as you can see, there's a blacked out section there to hide some of the less desirable bits you want to see, such as this black metal bit here and also the side of some of your fans. So as you can hopefully see from this angle, we've currently got a 360mm radiator installed. Now don't get excited, it doesn't come with the kit. I've purely put this in for demonstration purposes, and I did actually take all this apart just to get a better feel for the case before I started the video. I was a little bit concerned about mounting options for the 360mm rad. When you look at the case itself, when you look at the bottom section, in the bottom you can put 3 120mm fans, in the top section as well, 3 120mm fans, but it doesn't actually work for water cooling in that particular way. So you can't actually put a 360mm rad in the top or in the bottom section, at least certainly with the Fractal one that I was trying to use, it just physically wouldn't fit. The only real mounting option is in this kind of upright section here. Now I did have to put the radiator behind the metal, which we'll take a look at when we spin it around, and the fans are kind of in the front here. Now the reason behind that is you could put the radiator on the front with the fans in front, but then this bottom fan and top fan would then prevent you mounting fans in this position and in this position. So if you want to deck it out with all kind of 9 fans installed, you will have to take into consideration what radiators you're using, all that kind of usual stuff. Obviously, if you're planning to go with a 240mm radiator, it does open up a lot more options, and also you can, if you want to, just leave one of these sections blanked out. The choice is entirely up to you. Moving around to the side section, again, we've got this full-size tempered glass, which is held on with exactly the same screws, so if you do take it all off, you can mix and match the screws. There isn't any problems there. There is a very, very slight tint to the panel, but not really a great deal. Essentially, it's pretty much clear. So with the side off, we can get a better look inside and see what kind of room we've got. Now you can fit in here ATX motherboards. It won't take a extended ATX, or at least it may do, but again, this is going to come into a little bit of a problem on this section with the fans, depending on what you intend to mount. You can put a micro ATX board in there or an ITX board, although personally I think they're going to look a little bit weird, so realistically a full-size ATX is going to be where you're looking. Now a good thing with this, because you've got a little bit of extra height to the chassis, there is a ton of mounting options on the bottom. So the motherboard's going to end kind of around here, and at the top section around about here. So there's loads and loads of room at the top for fans and radiators and all that kind of stuff, top and bottom. Also loads of room to get your fingers in to put all the wires through, all that kind of usual stuff. At the bottom there is a small cutout for maybe fans, that sort of thing. Then slightly above you've got options there for where your HD audio, maybe your USB connectors and your front I/O comes through. Really nice and easy to access. Got a massive cutout here for water cooling options, so if you've got a backplate on a particular motherboard, really nice and easy to get access to that. And also at the top, which hopefully we'll try and get you some better pictures of, there's 3 massive cutouts at the top again for passing the cables through for your fans or maybe some sort of radiator system. Loads and loads of room, which is a really nice thing to see. All of the mounting pillars for the motherboard are actually pre-installed, ready to go, so there's 9 of those in place. There is actually a couple of spares as well in the accessories box, which we'll take a look at a little bit later. But essentially this section I think is pretty much perfect. I guess for some people it would have been nice to see it maybe a couple of millimeters wider, just so you could put in a 120mm tower cooler, but really this is set up for water cooling. That is where this case shines, and I think if you're looking to show it off, obviously you've got 2 lots of glass panels. The idea is you want people to see inside, so water cooling, all that kind of stuff, generally makes a case look a lot nicer, at least in my opinion. Again, talking about the cooling situation, you can see here, this is pretty much level. So you don't have to worry about if you've got a particularly big graphics card, which is going to overhang the motherboard. It will come out to kind of right the way up to here without any real issues. Again, with the graphics card, the thing to be more worried about is if you're mounting it in the traditional horizontal fashion, then if you've got a particularly wide card, you've got to consider then getting the cables into the graphics card for powering it. If they're powered from the rear, then no issues at all. But if they're plugged in from the side section, that's something you may want to take close attention to. One other consideration is actually during the build process, and this is something which I kind of touched on when I put the radiator in, is when you're trying to pass through the cables for maybe your 24-pin power connector or possibly a side-mounted USB 3.0 connector, there's a really tiny gap there. There is big cutouts all the way down, but there is not a great deal of room to work with. So if you're using a modular power supply where you can just disconnect the connector from the power supply, pass it through, absolutely fine. Although you may find in this particular instance, maybe if you're swapping out a power supply, you might have to just remove maybe one fan from whichever section it is that you need to pass through. Again, it's not the end of the world, but it maybe would have been a little bit nicer to see a little bit more length in the case and a little bit more of a gap there just to allow cables to pass through nicely. Although, having said that, because it is quite compact in this little area, when it's actually all cabled up, it's going to look really slick. Again, from this side, you can gain access to the underneath here. On the top, there is actually a filtered section for the fans. So depending if your particular setup is going to be intake on the top or intake on the bottom as well, there is actually pretty much almost identical section on the bottom with a removable filter, which comes off pretty easily. And again, depending on how you have your setup, so if you have it set as exhaust, then you probably don't want to use these. If you're using the bottom ones as intake, which I probably will be doing, then this is going to be great for getting rid of some extra bits of dust. Now for me personally, when I'm doing this build, my setup is going to be the top 3 fans are going to be intake, the bottom 3 fans are going to be intake, so a positive pressure system. Then we've got 3 fans here actually pushing air out through the radiator, So we're going to have a pretty decent amount of positive pressure there. And that's going to work in a lot of beneficial ways. So we're going to have a lot of air coming in downwards, a lot of air coming up. So the graphics card in the center is going to be cooled from the down air and also from the air coming up from the bottom. So this is going to be more orientated to keeping the graphics card cool rather than the CPU itself. Also, because again, it's being positive pressure, we have got ventilated section on the rear and also the PCI Express brackets. So all the extra heat in the system is going to be pushed out by the force of the fans. Also, what you can do with the 6 fans in that particular configuration is you can reduce the RPMs to a really, really low RPM. So 6 fans don't have to work as hard as 3 fans. So very low RPMs, which hopefully should keep things nice and cool and really nice and quiet. Moving around to the rear, so on this section you can see there is this ventilated area and we've got our 8 PCI Express blanking plates. So again, plenty of options for graphics cards, PCI Express expansions, all that kind of stuff. Really nice to do. This section here as well actually can be used for mounting an additional SSD. So this is kind of like a multi-purpose section. Also, that is the same for any of the fan mounting areas, can actually be used also for mounting SSDs on. There are included in the accessories box 2 SSD trays, which are basically multi-purpose and they can pretty much fit anywhere in the case. But we'll take a look at those a little bit later when we open up the back of the case. You've got your regular cutout here for I/O, and that's all really nice. It's actually quite a strong steel or aluminium, I'm not even too sure what the metal is, but it does seem very robust. Even on the front section, where you've just got this very thin piece, which kind of bridges between the 2 sections. Yeah, it's got a little bit of a wobble to it, but not a great deal. It does seem very, very well made. And especially considering the price point, the amount of glass in here, the amount of sheer metal, it does seem that it is particularly good value for money. Going back to the PCI Express blanking plates, these can be taken out. They are removable, they're non-captive, and also there's no metal in between them. So if you did want to use the vertical mounting GPU edition from Tecware, you can just remove all those, put in the GPU mounting section, and it's all fine. Or if maybe you're having a little bit of a swap around, maybe you change your motherboard and your PCI Express graphics card slot is either one higher or lower than the previous one, you don't have to worry about bending out bits of metal and then having to replace it. Those do come out and are completely replaceable. Also, as you can see from the back is the power supply section. So standard ATX power supply can fit in there up to 230 millimeters in length. And above there we've got another ventilation area, which again is going to be really handy for this positive pressure system. So all of the air which is coming in, which is being filtered top and bottom, is just going to be pushing out through all of these open vents. So dust accumulation should be minimal. Also in this top section there's a little hook there, so when you're maybe wiring up fans or whatever it is, then you can use that as a hook just to keep cables out of the way of the I/O shield during the assembly process. Moving around to the back side, I've already installed the 2 magnetic filters. So again, if you're using these fans or this section here for intake, you can have it filtered. If you're using it for exhaust, literally just take them off and leave them to one side. So then you've got your radiator or your 360 mils worth of fans all pushing out from the front section and into this back section. And again, because it's relatively open, any positive pressure is going to push through into the power supply chamber and the hard drive chamber and push out through this back section. There's also a removable magnetic filter here for the power supply. Now, generally power supplies are going to be intake, so you probably are going to want to use that one. Again, you don't have to, it's entirely up to you. If you've got a relatively low dust area, then it should be absolutely fine and will keep the power supply just slightly cooler. Taking the back panel off is as simple as undoing 2 thumb screws, and the panel just slides off, and as you can see the perforations there. And it's considering the amount of perforations there, it's actually still pretty rigid. So this gives us a better look into the rear section of the case. So quick tour, in this section we've got our front I/O, which is mounted on the top. We've also got this bracket here, which is removable, so just a couple of screws. You can actually choose whether this is held in with either 2 or 4 screws, depending on what drives you've got on there. You can actually put in 2 3.5-inch drives on the rear section, and it's actually padded on the back there as well, which hopefully we'll show you some B-roll of. So if you've got drives in there, mechanical ones, then the actual padding on there should help dampen some of that. Or alternatively, if you want to, you can put 2 SSDs in this section here. So like a typical SSD, mount one there, one there. Also, if you want to, with the mounts that are included in that box there, you can actually mount another drive up in this section here. And of course, you can do that in the front section as well, if you wanted to. Moving down a little bit further, so this is our power supply basement section. Again, there's an absolute ton of room in here, so cable management should be very, very simple. Again, there's lots and lots of tie-off points all around here. Plenty of room to hide cables. Also as well, the radiator, as you can see, which is installed there. So this is in the kind of rear section. You can, if you want to, add another 3 fans on there. So if you want to have a push-pull configuration for the radiator, very simple and easy to do. I was actually a little bit concerned that the radiator wouldn't quite fit, and as you can see, it is very, very close to the I/O section. But actually, with the radiator in there, which is, I think it's about a 25 or 30 mil radiator, there's still a few millimeters there, so don't be too concerned. Just do be careful when you put the radiator in to kind of lower it in from this bottom section and move it up as you go through. So let's take a look at the I/O section. So cable-wise, I've routed some of these already just to tidy things up a little bit, and I'll pull that one out of there. So this is your front panel I/O section. So on this, you've got a power switch, you've got a reset switch, there's a hard drive LED, and also a power LED. So that's all been bundled up together, and quite nice length cables as well, so nice and easy to manage. Then we've got our USB 3.0 header for the 2 Type A ports on the top, which we'll take a look at later. And again, nice long cable, so if your header is somewhere kind of weird on the motherboard, nice and easy. One thing though, obviously if your USB 3.0 header is kind of here on the motherboard, then potentially you've got a lot of extra cable to manage, but better to have too much cable than not enough. Same goes for your other connections. So we've got one which is for your USB 2.0, so 2 USB 2.0 ports on the front, and also then we've got our HD audio port. Would have been nice to have seen those cables just really covered up to the end, or maybe use blacked out cabling, but essentially it's not really the end of the world, and if you wanted to, you could get creative with a Sharpie. Moving it around a little bit, you can just see through there, so you can see the airflow path from the front to the rear. You can see the fans showing through, hopefully, from the different camera angles. So yeah, I think this is actually going to be a particularly well-cooled system. Now, we're not going to go too overboard on this. I'm actually going to be kind of repurposing some of my older stuff. So I'm going to be putting in here a Ryzen 5 3600, the XFX 5700 XT graphics card, Corsair 750 power supply, and maybe an NVMe drive and possibly another drive in here just to show how it can all be put together. But essentially it's going to be a relatively modest system. Fan-wise, I was considering using Tecware's Orbis fans, but unfortunately I've only got 3 of them currently at the moment. The other 3 that I'm waiting on haven't arrived as of yet, so we're going to be using the upHere fans, but essentially it's pretty much the same deal. So yeah, should be really nice. So 3 fans pulling in from the top, 3 fans pulling in from the bottom, and the radiator 3 fans pushing all the heat straight back out. Should be pretty good. So let's take a quick look at the bottom of the case, and as you can see, we've already removed the filter, and you can tell which one it is because there are slight indentations in there, so that fits around the feet. So again, nice and easy to get to. The feet are actually raised off by around about 3/4 of an inch there, so airflow underneath isn't perfect, but certainly is adequate. And yeah, pretty decent layout altogether. I actually quite like this. At first, I was a little bit unsure about this case, and I was thinking it's a little bit too close to the Lian Li. There's got to be some trade-offs, but there really doesn't seem to be at the moment. So flipping the case round, we've got the top section, so we've got a pretty decent setup here. Again, got this removable magnetic filter, so nice and easy access, and a really nice top section. Actually pretty rigid as well, even though, again, there's plenty of punch-outs there. It is pretty well made, very stiff. You're not going to have any issues with things rattling around in there. It's going to be great. Also, you can't put any 140mm fans anywhere in this case whatsoever. It is 120mm or smaller everywhere. You can, if you want to, on the rear sections where you've got these pass-throughs, the grill bits we looked at earlier, you can actually put 80mm fans in there if you wanted to. I think 80mm go in there pretty much. I'll put some links in the video description to the fans that fit in there. I did have a look at some earlier, but again, I think most people probably won't bother with that. Anyway, back to the I/O. So on this top section, we've got our power button, nice clicky power button. Then we've got a pair of USB 3.0 ports, a pair of USB 2.0 ports, then we've got our headset and mic jack, and then you've got your reset button and also an RGB button. So if you're using a RGB setup which has a separate controller, maybe you've got a motherboard that doesn't have RGB on it, you can use the RGB button, which terminates into a single dual pin, which most of us have seen before. So for me personally, I'm going to plug that into the upHere fan controller, and that will take control. Same works with the Tecware fans, the Orbis F3s, which we reviewed recently, which you can check out up here. That can plug into the controller, so then you can take manual control of the lighting, all that kind of cool stuff. So that's the I/O out of the way. Let's take a look in our accessories box. It's not overly exciting, but we should go through it as part of the unboxing process. So in this bag here, there's a bunch of cable ties. You've got some standoffs. I'm not too sure what they're actually for. I've had a look at the instructions, which actually, ironically, you do not get with this case. So if you do want the instructions, they are available from PDF form. I'll put those in the video description, so you can link to there so you can check out how it's all built and what the screws do. other than these plastic ones here, they're kind of rubber grommets. I'm not too sure what they're for. I'm guessing some sort of maybe I'm guessing maybe some kind of pump mounting if you're putting it onto the bottom. Not entirely sure. If anyone knows what they're for, or even Tecware, if you're watching this, what are these for? Please let me know. Anyway, the rest of it, so you've got all the screws in there, normal stuff from mounting, SSDs, hard drives, motherboards, all that kind of stuff. There's also a couple of standoffs, and also there's one of those screwdriver adapters for actually removing and installing motherboard pillars. Next up are the hard drive mounts. So again, these are for the 2.5-inch drives. So if you want to put one into the rear section, which I'll just spin around to give you an idea. So in this section here, if you wanted to put an SSD in there, or even the one on the other side, all you need to do is to get your SSD, mount it like that with those bits facing outward, and then you can just screw through the back and have it mounted there. Also, if you want to, again, because those screw mounts are pretty much universal, you could, if you want to, have a few of them mounted here at the bottom of the case, although I think most people will probably end up putting fans down there. But again, the choice is yours. We've got tons and tons of flexibility. There isn't really a right way and there isn't really a wrong way. It's just whatever works for you. Speaking of which, time for me to put some components in here, get it fired up so we can see what it looks like and see what some of the temperatures are like. So we'll be back after that. Okay, so we've finished the build. Well, I've finished the build and here it is. What do you think? I'll give you some B-roll so you can have a look around. Build notes. Now, there are certain things which I kind of hinted on at the beginning of this video, and yes, I was completely right. The graphics card is a little bit on the wide side. Currently, as it stands with the cabling on the side there, which hopefully you'll see from some B-roll, the cable is basically touching the glass, so it is extremely close. Although, this is a relatively wide card, so as I said before, if you wanted to, you could put the card vertically with the vertical mounting kit, or obviously just use a slightly narrower card. The choice there is up to you. Other points of note was the radiator. Again, that was actually quite tricky to fit. We did see that in the first part of the video, so that's absolutely fine. But yeah, it will not fit in the top or the bottom. 240s will in the top and bottom. No 280s because, as I said earlier, there's no options in here for 140mm fans, and obviously that equates to radiators also. I did have to take out some of the fans from the radiator also to get the power connector through for the motherboard. That was definitely something that needed doing. Other than that, really the build went actually very, very well. Everything was really easy to get to. It's a really nice open space to work in, and especially with the front panel and the side panel off, you can kind of get your hands in to move things around. The one thing which is slightly annoying is this bar. When you're actually trying to take these fans out or do anything with the fans, because of where that bar is, trying to get a long screwdriver straight in is a little bit of a pain, but that's a real nitpick and doesn't affect obviously the case at all. The build quality is fantastic, very stable, very rigid, all the kinds of things you'd expect to see from a case like this. All of the cabling for both the supplementary CPU power and also the I/O on the bottom, extremely easy to get to. The pass-throughs on the bottom, there's a really big gap there. Again, we'll see some B-roll of that now. And also same goes for the top. So if you're into sort of tweaking and tinkering around with your system, then very easy to do. Also, I did find with the fans, I did end up turning them around. So currently the system is working. So the 3 on the bottom are intake, blowing upwards, and the 3 in the top are acting as exhaust. So in the kind of normal regular setup, just idling, not really doing a great deal, it's just a complete airflow straight through and straight out, which works really well. Under load, actually, it does seem to work a little bit better like that. I was thinking that having the top 3 pushing air down would actually help temperatures, but actually it didn't. It actually made things a little bit worse, like 2 or 3 degrees. So certainly if you are building a system which is going to be putting out quite a lot of heat, then this is a really good way of doing it. Basically, then the heat from the graphics card is going out from the graphics card up and then pulled out of the system, whereas before it seemed like it was kind of fighting it a little bit, which I guess is the laws of thermodynamics, which I know very little of, but this certainly seems to have cured it. Temperature wise, temps are really good. I did find that these fans aren't the best for this particular job. There's no static power to them, they are airflow fans, and there does seem to be a little bit of a restriction with that kind of cutout mesh for the fans, which these fans just can't overcome. So certainly if you're putting a slightly better quality of fan in there, then you shouldn't have any issues at all, but they really don't have the grunt or the physical strength to pull air through, and especially if there's filters on there as well. I had to remove those, but that is down to the fans more so than the case. So temperature wise, as I expected, performs very, very well. The Ryzen 5 3600 with a very modest overclock Doesn't get over around about 60, 62 degrees under full load and Cinebench, which is kind of worst case scenario. And that was left on for about half an hour or so. So yeah, absolutely fine with that. I was expecting it to be a little bit higher, but actually 60 to 62 degrees thereabouts for me is absolutely fine. Idle conditions for the CPU are about 30 degrees, 29 degrees. It's actually a little bit warmer here in the UK at the moment. So our ambient temperature is about 23 degrees, 22, 23 degrees, something like that. So about 5 or 6 degrees over ambient, which is absolutely fine. And that is with all the fans ramped right down to make them as quiet as possible. Graphics card wise, this graphics card is a particularly hot beastie anyway. And under gaming conditions and also doing things like Firestrike, we're getting around about 75 degrees, which is kind of where you expect it to be. The junction temperature, often about 10 degrees hotter than that, but overall the average temperature worked out to be about 75 degrees on the graphics card. So yep, totally where I would expect it to be. Okay, so with the glass panels off, we can have a slightly closer look and you can possibly get less reflections. As you can see, it just goes together really well. The overall look of it, I actually really like the look of it. It's one of those things, I'm not entirely sure whether this kind of setup is the setup for me. It is more of a showpiece PC, so essentially this is probably going to end up being replacing the PC here behind me, and yeah, it's essentially a showpiece PC. For normal everyday use, I think a mesh fronted PC case, for me personally, is probably the way to go, especially if it's not on your desktop. If it's underneath the desk and you're not too worried about the glass, etc., then definitely a open mesh front case generally does tend to work better as far as thermals are concerned. But if you're into the looks and also want a bit of flexibility and you just want to have kind of 9 fans in your PC and have this whole crazy RGB bling, then definitely this is a really, really good option. Certainly a lot cheaper than the Lian Li alternatives. There are a few other companies which have tried to emulate this kind of style, and from what I can see at the moment and from what I've actually looked up online, this actually does the best of all of them and also comes in at a really, really good price point. So taking into consideration how easy it was to build, and yes, it was extremely easy, everything went really well, tons and tons of pass-throughs as we said already. The only things that I would possibly change if I was to make the case like this myself would be to add a little bit more width to it. So this would actually work out beneficial in many ways. So if you add a little bit more width, maybe another 20mm, you could then put in 140mm fans, which would then be able to spin a little bit slower and also create more air moving through. Also give you a little bit more room for the graphics card, so there's a little bit more room between the graphics card and the connectors. Again, the vertical mounting thing kind of gets around that, but for most people I think just having a 20mm wider would actually work out very well. It wouldn't make this system look out of balance or anything, and I think if they're looking to refine this, so a VXR2, then a slightly wider chassis would be ideal. Moving around to the front, so you can see here the kind of the layout, and again, because the fans are slightly recessed there, you can see there's no concerns with the graphics card getting too close to the fans, although if you do put a radiator obviously in front of that metal, space out another 25-30mm, then you may start getting problems, and also covering up things like any SATA ports. A lot of SATA ports, as you can see from here, they tend to be angled outward rather than into the case, so do pay some attention to that if you're thinking about doing a build in this case. So moving around to the back, I've had to power the system down so I can twist this all the way around. You can see it's actually not too bad to work in, especially cable management wise. I've actually made life a little bit more difficult for myself by using one of these RGB hubs for all fans, etc. So this again could be a little bit neater, but you can get an idea of where the cables go, etc. Also, cable tie in all of the I/O around to not obstruct the radiator was absolutely fine. Obviously, if you wanted to, you could just let it all hang down there. It doesn't make hardly any difference anyway, but certainly I think this looks a little bit neater. And if you're considering putting some extra fans there, then definitely that is possible. The power supply mounting section, really good. There is actually a very small gap between that and this cage here, so you can kind of tuck wires in underneath here, just in case if you want to tidy that up, so that looks quite nice and neat. Good point about this as well, actually, if there's any issues with the fans, you can quite easily get access to them and disconnect them, etc., to move them around, which actually was very helpful when I ended up turning the fans on the front from facing inward to outward, so that was nice and easy to do, really good access. Plenty of cable tie down points, as we said before. Again, you can go a little bit crazy. I didn't want to do too much because I was considering swapping things around in this build anyway, so I didn't want it to be perfect, but certainly actually it doesn't look totally untidy. There's no real crazy messes going on. It's a little bit untidy in this bottom section, but again, no one's going to see it, so realistically, what does it matter? For me at the moment, the noisiest thing in this PC actually turns out to be the power supply, which is the Corsair CX750M semi-modular. Now for some reason there's a bit of a tick to the fan, which is definitely more noticeable now that the fan is actually on the side here rather than being kind of face down and being absorbed into the desk or whatever it's on. So yeah, that is certainly an issue which I need to address, but other than that the system is essentially pretty much silent. The Fractal Define S36, great cooler, does the job exactly as it should do and fits in there nicely. I may try different coolers in there to see what goes on. I am actually considering going back to air cooling and putting the stock AMD Wraith RGB cooler in there and maybe 3 additional fans down there just to see what that does in terms of the temperatures and how it affects the whole setup. Certainly the water cooling does work very well. Temperatures, again, very, very well under control. But you'd expect that really with 6 fans and tons of ventilation on it. So overall, I'm very pleased with it. Very easy to build in. Very cost effective, around about £75–80 I think it is here in the UK. Again, do consider your graphics card. I did actually try putting in my EVGA RTX 2060 KO in there, and with the cabling in, that had no problems at all because that's a little bit narrower. So again, if you're using that sort of thing, then absolutely fine. If you had a shorter card on there, you would also get a little bit of room here for maybe a reservoir, that sort of thing, if that is something you're thinking of. Again, there's loads and loads of flexibility, tons and tons of options. Full details of the specifications for the sizes and dimensions are on the website. Also, again, in the video description, there will be links to the PDF to show how it all goes together, and obviously links to Tecware sites so you can check out the other cases and components they do. So massive thank you to Tecware for sending me the VXR case for review purposes. Appreciate it a lot. And yeah, hopefully this is a sign of more things to come out of Tecware. So I've been Mike, this is Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and hopefully we'll catch you in the very next video. Thanks for watching.